I'll introduce myself before I start screen sharing, but hello to Shannon, Courtney and Nicole and Keith and Brett online. Thank you for coming along today. I know it's a really busy time of year and for coming to hear me talk. This is my first sort of interaction more formally with the research group, which is really exciting. I feel like I've been meaning to and wanting to kind of be engaged for quite a while now because a lot of my work looks at sustainability and things like that in terms of my area. Hey, how you going? So let me get started here. So I will start with acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're on today, the Yagara and the Turrbal people, and pay respects to past, present and emerging elders, and acknowledge that these places have always been places of teaching, research, learning, storytelling, design. And so thank you and thank you to Jen as well for asking me to talk for today. Let's see if I can get, sorry, 1 second. Tab back to PowerPoint and that should work. Lovely. So my name, hello, for those of you who don't know me, but I think I do know everyone, which is lovely. My name is Tessa Rixon. I'm a senior lecturer at the School of Creative Practice. My area is in theatre production and design. I have worked as a theatre and performance designer, technologist, manager across a whole range of different art forms, from theatre, dance, musicals, festivals, events, sort of community works, etc. And I've been teaching here at QUT and researching as a practitioner researcher for about 15 years now. And so my area sort of sits in the middle of theatre and performance design, technology, but then also sustainable or eco-ethical practice. And so what I thought I'd sort of share with you today is some of the things, or one of the things that a long ongoing project that I've been working with myself and a variety of other partner education organisations here in Australia and over in North America, and some arts organisations. Hi Jane, come on in. So we've got some weird feedback going on Jenny's computer, so yeah, it's all good.
I went rocking up to the design lab and I was exactly on time.
We are recording. We totally started, Jane. So what I'm going to talk to you today is a big part of sort of my research and what I do, but it's also looking at sort of pedagogical practice as well, because this project involved working with theatre and performance design students from Australia and North America, looking at basically how we challenge traditional ways of training the next generation of designers in theatre and performance. And so it's called Eco-Ethical Design for Theatre and Performance, Challenging Traditional Human-Centric Design for World Making. PowerPoint for this one, there we go. So I'll start, for those of you not familiar with the term, so stenography is my main area of work. Stenography comes from two Greek words, skine and graphia, or grapho, which means scene writing or scene painting. For a very long time, and that term first emerged, I think, back in Aristotle's writings. Scenography for a really long time was synonymous with set design or costume design over in Europe, but the last 15 or 20 so years, it's experienced this sort of real liberation from traditional design approach and also thinking as well. So scenography is understood these days and embraced in Australia, and here at QUT we have a minor in it, as the creation of the world for a live performance. Or I also put in here creative encounters, because it might not just be theatre, dance, etc. It could be everything from an immersive site-specific art installation or something that goes beyond traditional theatre spaces. And scenography is not just concerned with set and costume design, but all of the elements that go into creating a world for live performance. So all of the technology, lighting, set, sound, props, costume, everything from the composition of the music, the video, basically anything that is part of the environment of live performance. So scenography is the word that I use a lot for that. And very recently, the area that I find myself working in more and more with my colleague Tanya Bayer, who coined this term, is eco-sonography, so Tanya, who's now based over at Griffith, who's my collaborator, and a lot of the stuff I'll talk about today, about 10 years ago, through her PhD research, she proposed eco-sonography as a way that supersedes, or tries to counter rather, the traditional linear production process that we often follow in live performance. So being pre-production, production, and then post-production. There we go. And that is sort of the standard model of working from small independent through large mainstream commercial theatre companies. What was inherent in that was a lack of thinking about what would happen with materials or resources or ideas after the project ended. And the arts and theatre and performance in particular, as compared to some other design disciplines, were quite ephemeral. Our projects might last for a week, a couple of months, a couple of years at best, and then they end. Seasons close, shows finish, and the materials and the resources that go into it either get thrown away or discarded, or at best sometimes put back into storage, the odds of it potentially being reused again. But as of course, the focus on more sustainable methods, so it has grown around the world, theatre and performance design has not been ignorant of that. And the way that we're looking at that is through eco-sonography and challenging this idea of moving beyond a linear sort of approach to adopting a more sort of circular economy thinking. And so what Tanya proposed through her research and what we use in our work is this eco-sonography. She calls it the 3 Cs. The ideas of co-creation, celebration, and circulation of ideas, of materials, of design for theatre and performance. So suggesting that we need a new approach to theatre production that overturns traditional production models. So moving from the linear to the circular. And peppered throughout this are some examples of actually mostly QT student works that came out of various exhibits and design charrettes or intensives that we've done over the past few years. But I've also done a lot of this work in terms of looking at what is the fate or the future of performance design given the climate crisis. And this is obviously also very relevant as an educator and very helpful, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, in terms of how it can shift or give younger designers tools to counter their climate anxiety and their feelings of helplessness, but also in terms of how they do what they need to do. So I've done it earlier, did some early research into this, but also kind of taking on the idea of that there's no one solution to this, but looking at or challenging kind of the actions that continue to make sense in this instance. Took a lot of inspiration from the Dark Mountain Manifesto, which if you're not familiar with, I definitely go and read with a glass of wine. It'll get you very fired up. But it's really challenging sort of the narratives that we have told ourselves about the humanity's dominance, the never-ending dream of capitalism, and ignoring basically, or how that has led to this ignorance or lack of ability to understand or really tackle what's happening in the environment. Also, the idea is that there is no one fix, there's no one solution, but it's actually thinking about the actual actions that we take and how we can counter them. So the framework itself is focused on these 3 Cs. This is lovely Tanya on level 3 of this building a couple of years ago, working with our students. So moving from a human sort of egocentric approach to more of an eco-centric approach. So again, sort of decentering that human designer and thinking more about how we might fit and work as designers with a deeper understanding of thinking about place and our role as place. In theatre and design, actually not, for the past couple hundred years, the dominant sort of focus is on the designer as the shining light, the person with the vision, and everything has to be sort of suited to create the work that they want. And eco-sonography sort of challenges that and to challenge designers to think about not so much their ego, but actually rather maybe how their design might respond to place and how they can think about what's going to be the life cycle of the design afterwards. So there's a big focus on recognising and thinking about the place in which your work is situated, Through co-creation, the idea that you might actually be able to co-create designs or works with community groups in your areas, whether that is, you know, a lovely example of some of this was there's a performance group overseas who they would use inherently unsustainable materials like styrofoam and other things like that to create theatre designs, but they partnered with local companies who use that material as part of their daily work, because they borrow all the materials and return it at the end, and in so doing kind of were able to use unsustainable materials, but to sort of shed light or draw attention to their use in this local industry. Celebration, again, it's this idea of sort of rather than our whole focus as performance makers being driven up to opening night, and that's it, that's the pinnacle, and then after that we can go on to our next gig and not worry about it. Celebration sort of looks at that point as a midpoint in the cycle. And circulation, as the name kind of implies, is that the idea that materials, but also ideas, are not discarded but considered as potential resources for sharing and co-creation beyond the production. So thinking about how sets and costumes and other items might be able to dismantled and shared for reuse. Another lovely example from this, and Tanya's book goes into lots of examples from all around the world. The beautiful opera company in, can't remember what country in Europe, but they partner with a local community drag organisation. So whenever they finish an opera production, they donate all of their wigs to this drag organisation. So all of the queens every year get new wigs from this. Oh, yeah. So one thing that eco-scenography sort of tries to do is challenge the idea. It's really common in theatre. If you go, I want to be sustainable, they're like, well, one, you can't do that because we can't work that way because it's too expensive. Or two, oh, it's going to look like shit because nothing that's sustainable looks any good. That's a real common sort of attitude in a lot of mainstream companies particularly. So sort of the approach with this is that really challenging what a sustainable or eco-design might actually look like. So what we've been doing over the past few years through a few partnerships is look at how that framework can inform performance design pedagogy in particular. So in 2021-22, across the Northern Hemisphere summer, we partnered with Griffith University and York University in Canada and did a series of globally distributed e-learning programs. That was the name that York called it for us to get our funding, with undergrad and postgraduate students. And I'll talk a little bit in a second about sort of our other partners in that and how we approached it. But this was individual student projects over 4 months where they developed seed concepts and pitched design ideas in response to climate change theatre works, which I'll talk about in the next slide. These ideas didn't go through to fruition. We stayed in the seed concept phase. So the images through today are examples of those seed concepts. They allowed students free rein to play and experiment with the ideas. And we just weren't in a circumstance where we could then support every single project all the way through to fruition. So these works were exhibited at World Stage Design, which is sort of like the Olympics of theatre and performance design, which happens every 4 years and exhibits student and professional designs around the world, and in Brisbane and through some publications. And then last year, over in Prague, at the Prague Quadrennial of Performance Design and Space, which is another, in the off cycle for World Stage Design, is the other massive sort of international celebration of scenography and performance design over in Prague. We ran an in-person intensive that looked at applying these the approach with a whole range of both professional and student designers to rapidly prototyping seed concepts. We found waste basically from the academy that we were based in for that, and there was a work in progress and showing for that. All of our things we've been lucky to. We hit a good seam of publications, so there's a variety of articles that go into a lot more detail with these. So for this, we partnered with a group called the Climate Change Theatre Action. Every 2 years, this international group, they put out a call to playwrights all around the world to write short 5 to 10 minute texts in response to a provocation. So this is the list of, on the left-hand side, from 21 and 2023. Some are very open form, open concept. it might read more like a piece of poetry than a theatre text. Others are a lot more a duologue, a monologue, a scene. There's a whole range of sort of inspiration material that students can take. It's a really useful resource if anyone is ever looking for open source, international perspective sort of creative works that they could use as starting material for creative responses. And so yeah, next year will be the next time it comes out. So 21-22 was Griffith, York and QUT, and we did this through a series of both in-person but also online workshops. Students were sort of rapidly prototyping different types of materials as well, and different ways of sort of presenting ideas. I myself come from a technology background, so I'm always focused on thinking about the role technology can or should play in these circumstances. Lots of sort of recycling and playing with materials. We've also partnered with, there's a group based in Montreal called EcoSeno, who their entire sort of business model is on helping companies recycle and reuse physical materials from live performance. And they run workshops where they use the 3D CAD program SketchUp, where students are given the elements of an actual real existing stage show, and they get to recreate their own design based upon these, you know, it's the digital objects of it, but the idea of thinking, if I had these resources, what could I then do with it to repurpose it for my own design? And they had design presentations and feedback from our colleagues around the world who are involved there, and then we were exhibited over in Calgary, and then here at QUT downstairs. And then 2023, so last year, we were in this incredible facility over in Prague called Damu for 3 days in these amazing pokey sort of workshops. I led a small intensive looking at how projection design in particular could be used in an eco-scenographic way, using materials that we found in the recycling bin or from their store that we then put back after we were finished. And so there's a lot of sort of like iterative feedback, and students were again challenged to come up with a seed concept in response to a play or a text they'd chosen, and demonstrate how, if they could take their idea to fruition, how they would think about those 3 C's, that co-creation, celebration and circulation, as a way of reducing our impact as designers on the environment. And there's a public showing, and there's some of the works that are exhibited there. So from an American student, a Spanish student, and then actually a student here, I should say an emerging designer from Brisbane here. So all of them sort of doing different responses, and again, rapidly sort of prototyping it over a couple of days. And we've got an article coming out, hopefully in a week, actually, in sort of one of our top tier journals on theatre and performance design training that looked at green training methods that goes into a lot more detail about this process as well. So I was really interested in how I could actually take something that a few of you will be familiar with, which is the leave no trace principles. It's like how hikers or backcountry sort of explorers reduce their impact on the environment. I've been really interested in how I can actually use that as a framework to help students lower their impact when they're on country or in anything other than an urban environment. So a few of the things we sort of noted is how this approach impacts or changes the way students approach their work. The first thing I'll say is that when I've applied it here at QT or in these 2 methods, there is definitely a feeling of a little bit more hope in students in terms of because the beautiful thing with this sort of eco-scenographic approach, it's not prescriptive. It's not do this, replace this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. It's a different way of thinking about how you as a designer even come up with your idea in the first place. And in so doing, you slowly sort of begin to reduce your impact. And so I found that quite empowering. There's a real sort of interesting focus on sort of circular approaches of materials being used. This is one of our students, her seed design. She was going to create this maze out of polystyrene that the performance would take place in. And then after it was performed, she was going to pack the whole thing down, put it into a cube in an exhibition space, and then there's a particular type of worm, it's a mealworm, that actually gets nutrition from eating polystyrene. And so the second life of her design would be this installation piece where the mealworms would slowly eat and decompose the physical set itself. Things I'd never heard of at the time, this amazing worm. But so she's thinking about not just, again, we look at that material and go, that's not particularly environmentally friendly, and yeah, polystyrene can have terrible impacts on the environment. But looking at other ways you might be able to then circulate that back in another creative form as well. There's just a couple examples. There's a real interesting focus when it comes from taking a scenographic approach, and that's definitely what made me want to join this group, is thinking about the materiality and the power of materials and letting materials lead you as a designer. That's something that was really powerful for students as well, because often it's like, what's my idea? What do I want to do? What should the design be? And in this instance, they took inspiration from their scripts or the locations they wanted their work to be based in. And this work in particular, so the play was called How to Hold Water. So there's a lot of discussions of water. So the student in this instance was really fascinated to see how, and I've got to try and remember the technical, but she did a spectrogram of like the human voice, but also the sound of the waves make when it's crashing upon the shore. And she saw that there was patterns in the sounds of waves crashing that in the spectrograph or spectrogram sort of echoed or looked like to her the human voice. So what she did was she went out and she recorded water sources, and then she edited it together. And the end product actually was sort of more of a audio work than a performance design, where she had the water speak the words of the play. So I'll see if this works. Apologies to those on Zoom, you probably can't hear it. It's a little subtle, that one, but happy to share that with anyone else. A really heavy focus on rethinking alternative spaces for performance. And this is not a new thing. Theatre and performance has spent for many, many thousands of years, and if we look at First Nations traditions, not being in a theatre building. But this sort of approach also helps students rethink the locations works could be as a way of connecting more deeply to particular places. So this was designed from a group of students that were going to do a site-specific design based in one of the rainfall locations in the scenic rim, and sort of rethinking about how they could locate people in that space and turn that into a performance space. And there's a few examples of that as well. And then sort of one thing we found is through this is students or participants began to really think about how community groups, engaging with community, could be the starting point for design inspiration for them. Which again, of course, for other design disciplines is nothing new, but in theatre, our process is often, let's start as a small tiny group sitting around a table, let's start with a script, and then we go out from there, instead of actually going, what's happening in the community at this point in time? What's going on? This work in particular is from a student who's based, ex-student of mine from Northern Queensland, who was aware there was a lot of youth dissatisfaction in the community that she was in. So all she wanted to do was co-create the physical set using found and recycled materials in every town this hypothetical work could go to, and the design would be created with the youth from that community. So, and then they would stage the work and then pack it back down again. And so the idea that would be something that would actually engage community in the co-creation of the physical set design. You could have and think about how, discussions around recycling and materiality, but it's also used for the performance. And then this is our article that should be coming out soon, but we talk about this idea of different access points to how an eco-scenographic approach might be adopted. And then this idea is part of the beauty, it's not prescriptive, it's not a series of rules, but rather a conceptual rethink of the production process shifting from linear to circular. That mimics the life cycle of our world. Oh, cool, awesome, not too much overtime. And this has been super brief. There's a whole variety of other things attached to this, but I thought I'd come at it more from the pedagogical sort of learnings here. And we're hoping to we've actually applied for some philanthropic funding from Finland, of all places. We've got a collaboration over there with a Finnish team that are looking at eco-creativity. So we're hoping we can kind of keep this going, but with some Euro partners the next couple of years. But this is if you're interested in looking at there's some nice pictures in here as well. The middle one's actually a visual essay as well. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jen, for asking me to come along today.
Thanks.
Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great.